This is organized by the University of Torino in the frame of the Master in Cultural Property Protection and Crisis Response, which is a program in partnership with the Italian Army, the Italian Carabinieri Corps, the International Institute of Humanitarian Law, and the Restoration Center of the Venaria Reale. Here represented by the Deputy Director of the program, Giovanna. Why this? Because we know that cultural heritage is always and constantly exposed to violence and to criminal activities. And especially now, the worldwide call for protection of cultural heritage is assuming many more meanings given the current crisis in which we all live. So to reflect on these big questions and to where to concentrate our effort in our next planning for the next edition of the Master that will take place next autumn 2021, we are inviting people from institutions which are daily committed and in the front line to work on such issues, to dialogue with us, and especially to understand how to better take action towards these big questions. The first talk today will be held by Zaki Aslan from ICCROM. I let Rafif Mahmoud from Damascus. Hi, Rafif.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Alessio.
Him. Please just to keep your microphone off, to say that this session will be recorded and made available also on the website of our Master. Rafif, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Alessio, for this invitation. I am Rafif Mahmoud from Syria. I live in Damascus. I've worked in the field of cultural heritage since 2011 as a supervisor for cultural project at Syria Trust for Development. It's a Syrian NGO on based culture community development as a team, and also as a team member of evaluation of the nomination files on UNESCO's list as we prepare to nominate the practices on to the Damascus Rose. As you know, it was inscribed on the representative list. Actually, I was a participant in the first edition of the master program, Cultural Property Protection in Crisis Response in 2018-2019. That has many good impact for me as a person, because actually the cultural heritage work in Syria is recent. And as a result, for the lack of research and the specialization related to cultural heritage in Syria, this program provided me with an expanded and at the same time accurate and deep vision for the fields of work and research in this field. So, because in Syria only we know cultural heritage as antiquities, as tangible heritage. So that's why did my vision for other fields and research about this domain. I learned a lot about economics, politics, management of cultural heritage, and an extensive and critical knowledge of law. And that's very, very important for everyone, I think, in the world, and especially for Syria in the time of illicit traffic, for example. So knowing the laws and the treaties related to cultural heritage, that broadened my perception on how to expand the mechanism of understanding how to select, appropriate, and special research for my country in the first place, and the research in the country or in the world in general, because as I said, the lack of literatures in Syria make us, I don't want to say blind, but actually it's blind on how we research. So this program gives me a tool, a real tool to develop my skills. Syria suffered a lot from the crisis. So there is a lot of things to work on it. After aggressive armed conflict, massive destruction of infrastructure, immigration, we had an image lose in our culture, and a lot to do. A high level of international collaboration with organizations specialized in restoration, revitalization, capacity building, and support for strategy and project concerned with the local community and cultural heritage. But I would like also to say those in charge of the management, let's say, of cultural heritage, because they are the executive body of work. In this regard, I have to. I would like to introduce Mr. Zaki Aslan, the regional representative of ICCROM for the Arab state and founding director of Sharjah-based ICCROM-ATHAR Regional Conservation Center. I would like just to mention some of ICCROM's work briefly, because I would leave the floor, of course, for Dr. Aslan to talk about it. Where ICCROM, in collaboration, for example, with DGIM and ICMOS, to launch the e-learning course for Syrian cultural heritage professional in protection the Syria's cultural heritage in time of armed conflict. That was in 2013. And in effort to provide support to cultural heritage professionals in Syria, the ICCROM-ATHAR Regional Center joined forces with UNESCO and the Arab Regional Center for World Heritage, Bahrain, to hold a course, I think it was in Beirut, Lebanon, on the first aid of built cultural heritage for Syrian professionals in 2015. Many efforts had been done by the ICCROM with collaboration, of course, with the DGM or other parties, but the parties in Syria or international. The most recent things that in 2020, Syria won the ICCROM Sharjah Award for good practices in preservation and protection cultural heritage in the Arab region. In its second round, through restoration project of archaeological market called Al Sakatiya. It's an ancient souk in ancient city of Aleppo. So, as you can see, many efforts have been done. I just mentioned just a lot because I just wanted to brief everything. But we need a lot to protect our cultural heritage, especially during the crisis and beyond. And there is still a lot to do, actually. So I would like to thank ICCROM and the other parties that have collaboration to protect our cultural heritage through this crisis. We had suffered from almost 10 years in Syria. And I would like to thank you, Alessio, and all the administrative team for letting me introduce myself and participate in this talk series. And now I will leave the floor for Mr. Zaki Aslan. And thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Rafif, for this good introduction. I'm so happy that you mentioned ICCROM's work in Syria in the past decade or so.
Of course.
And I'd like to thank Alessio and the colleagues from the Fondazione Sant'Agata, Giovanna, Ottavia, for arranging and organizing this talk today. I'm so happy also to meet the students, and I hope we will have more interchange and exchange and collaboration in the future. We also have a master program that I will talk about during my presentation today. So As Alessio asked me for today, I will be talking about ICCROM in general. Already Rafif said a few things, the ATHAR program, and how we moved from a program to an office or a center in Sharjah. Then I'll be talking about the status of cultural heritage in the Arab region and the status of knowledge when we established this office. And then I'll be talking about the subject matter of your master program as well, and how we at ICCROM, with all the colleagues involved, of course, developed, this what we call disaster risk management approaches on different levels. And finally, I'll be talking about our work from the regional office on the capacity building, particularly to develop leadership and to develop policies, studies, outreach programs, knowledge dissemination in publications, and also field projects relevant to this field. So, as many of you know, ICCROM is an intergovernmental organization established by UNESCO in 1956. And within the 137 member states, we have 18 Arab member states that we serve, particularly from the regional office in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. Our programs are based on the work that we try to develop in everything we do, in strategic directions that we have tailored to serve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, particularly the ones that you see here in front of you, ranging from education, climate change, peace and justice, partnerships, of course, but more importantly, of course, the SDG number 11, which is related to sustainable cities and communities. In 2004, I was engaged to establish this program, and I'm very happy that also I can see with us my colleague Maria Teresa Yaquinta, who's also with us. We started this program in 2004, and we developed with the directors of heritage, particularly in the Levant area at the beginning, an ambitious program aimed to protect and promote cultural heritage in the Arab region, broaden access, appreciation, and understanding of its past. But more importantly, since that time, we were looking at ways of sustaining such an effort, which was originally supported by the Italian government, but then we had more support from the Arab League, and later on by the government of the UAE, and particularly the Emirate of Sharjah. The aim has been since then to establish this idea of a nucleus for training and development, and we've been working since then towards achieving this goal. So the program was in evolution. It was called the ATHAR program, as you heard already. And we started the program to serve the countries in the Levant area, but then we expanded this program with the director generals who came in every 6 years to help consolidate the efforts that we started in 2004. We signed several agreements starting in 2008 with the government of Sharjah and the UAE. And then we developed this feasibility study to establish this center. And then in 2011, we had signed the agreement to establish this center. So we inaugurated the center in 2014, and we signed also a headquarters agreement with the United Arab Emirates as a member state in 2015. And since then, we have been also continuing what we have started in ATHAR program, and we continue to serve the Arab member states. These initiatives were endorsed by the ministers of culture of the Arab states in particular, and there are several meetings that were convened, but also by our General Assembly of ICCROM in the years 2011, 2012, I guess, in that biennium. So we started this office with this motto, knowledge, the future of our heritage. And since then, we started to look into possibilities how to take further and forward what we've started and we put in place previously. In that particular time and that period, let's say, everybody heard about what was called the Arab Spring at the time, and we had seen several destruction of cultural heritage in the Arab region, starting in Syria. And Rafif mentioned, our efforts in 2013. We started to work with Syria, but then there were other incidents of conflicts and wars, particularly in other countries like Yemen, of course, previously in Iraq, and these are also some images from Syria. Also, the picture on the very right is during the Egyptian revolution, where also some damage occurred at the museum at the Egyptian museum at the time. Other images are from Iraq and from Yemen, and probably you are very familiar with such images of destruction since that time. So we started this office, and in mind there was a huge demand and pressing need to address issues related to destruction, but also to looting of archaeological heritage and also illicit trafficking at the time. But at the same time, in the Gulf, because we're based in the Gulf, there was also a lot of development related to establishment of new museums. You probably heard of, on the right, you have the Louvre Abu Dhabi. It was under construction at the time when we started. Now it's open. There were other museums like the Islamic Museum in Doha, but also you see on the lower part here, the Islamic Civilization Museum in Sharjah, which was inaugurated around that time. So with this in mind, we started to review and think and find, refine, how we can address these emerging needs in light of these disasters that took place in particular, but also the needs in the Gulf that I mentioned as well. But I will be focusing, of course, in the context of your program, on the disaster risk management. And on that, I am sure the students are aware of the fact that there is a risk management cycle. We talk about the period before the events or the disaster, where we talk about prevention practically, risk assessment, preparedness. So the prevention stage is actually important that we try to address, but also we try to address together with the colleagues in Rome the phase during the disaster, which is the response phase, where we developed with my colleague Aparna Tandon the first aid to cultural heritage in times of crisis. More recently, we've been working on aspects related to the after disasters, which we talk about reconstruction, post-war and post-conflict reconstruction and recovery, rehabilitation, treatment, etc. So we've been trying to address the three phases in the course of the work that we have been doing since that time. So today I'll be talking a little bit about, I will start talking about this, and then I will give you an idea about how we address that in the different types of activities that we developed. What was at hand at the time were such manuals that we had published by ICCROM. You see here on the screen, since the late 80s, there was Fielden's book, Between Two Earthquakes, but then we had Herb Stovall's book, which was translated, in fact, also into Arabic, Risk Preparedness, and later on, the Managing Risk in World Heritage Context, which we developed with UNESCO and advisory bodies. ICCROM also, up to that period, more or less, was focusing on areas related to preventive conservation. And we all heard about preventive conservation at the time, talking about all measures and actions that are aimed at avoiding and minimizing future deterioration and loss, especially in museum context. And we were talking together with colleagues working with us in the collections unit at ICCROM at the time on issues related to how it is important to document, to see how we store objects in museums, how we handle, how we pack, how we secure, and talking about also environmental management, staff training, public awareness, legal compliance, etc. So later on in this period, we looked into what we call the risk-based approach to preventive conservation, how we could reduce risks to cultural heritage. And we had collaboration, especially with the Canadian Conservation Institute at the time, with my colleagues again in Rome, but also we were involved in publishing a book that I will talk about in a moment. And the idea here is to look at the different layers. If we think about an object in a museum and how each object is surrounded by layers within the museum itself, within the, let's say, within the display or the storage unit that exists, the room, the building, the site, and the region, and how we try to minimize the risks if we look into the context in which each object is placed. So there were many books in that period about preventive conservation, but the problem was at the times that there, we knew what we should be doing, and I mentioned the themes that they were addressed, but we did not really look into prioritizing our actions, especially in this museum context. So there was some inspiration taken from the health and business field on risk approaches to different areas of how we analyze risks, how we develop risks, and that actually informed the methodologies that ICCROM has developed since then into this area. So this is just to introduce you on how this evolved. And I mentioned to you the First Aid to Cultural Heritage. That was a program that we started to develop in 2010, but also on regional level, since 2012, in fact, we started to look into these issues. And the idea is to look at areas related to documentation, security, rescuing, and stabilizing heritage until specialized help is available. So first aid is really the response phase or the response procedures. Thinking about that, we looked with the students and the participants as to how we could analyze the situation, and we assessed the risks to understand the nature of the emergency, the threats, the actors on the ground who play a major role, how are the relations between these actors, and the strengths and weaknesses of the existing management systems, from the legal to policy to institutional, that we still are actually facing whenever we have a conflict nowadays. So how we understand this from the start to build robust plans into this area. And of course, I mentioned the layers and how we analyze the context. So in areas in the Arab region, when we talk about conflict, we talk about complex emergency. And here we talk about humanitarian crisis, where there is considerable breakdown of authority, which requires an international response that goes beyond the mandate of or capacity of any single local agency or any single agency in general. So the idea, and we learned a lot actually from what happened in the civil war in Beirut, in Lebanon. And we learned how we will, we had like many lessons to learn from that experience, especially starting from understanding the reality of this complex emergency and how, the idea of memory of those who left Beirut and would be different than those who stayed at the time of the civil war. And in this context of first aid, we looked into issues related to in-situ stabilization, how we stabilize structures, buildings, how we put the objects in safe havens and arrange and organize them in storages. So this is something that we worked on in the training that we developed at the time. Complex emergency looks also into the humanitarian dimension. These are pictures from Yemen, and here we look at the basic needs not only talking about cultural heritage, but also about the very basic needs of energy, about, you know, I mean, you see here the bottle, the gas, the gas bottles that people need to cook, for example, and etc., etc. So in Syria, this is a map that we could see in 2013 how much looting had occurred after the crisis in which areas of Syria when ISIS was you know, active at the time. This is actually a letter from the ISIS director, you see it in Arab on the top, practically giving instructions to the people with him how to use these cultural artifacts for you know, to finance their actions. One aspect also that we try to address during, I mean, crisis phases is how we document and how we could use the drones and satellite technologies that you are all, I'm sure, now familiar with. And this has come into, you know, become really an important aspect, especially if we don't have access to sites like this one of Dura Oropus in Syria, how we could compare the before and after the destruction and the looting. But also in Aleppo here, you could compare, you know, the city before and after the destruction, together with the pictures that you have here from the Umayyad Mosque. So in that phase, we looked into several aspects, also how we can document and how we could do rapid documentation, etc. In the recovery phase, as I mentioned earlier, we learned a lot from Beirut. We learned about how it is important to involve the communities in the recovery process, and how, you know, the experience when central Beirut was has become, you know, I don't know if you are familiar with the fact that there was a company called Solidaire and there were shareholders. So the owners become shareholders practically, and they did not really have a say because it was a company and there was an investment outlook into the rebuilding of the city. But also we can think about Palmyra and the archaeology and how we could reinstate, you know, the ruined structures. And this has been also a lot of discussion, and we can also talk about, if you want, in the question period, and how we can think to reestablish not only cities, but also archaeological heritage that has been destroyed after the war. So with this, I just wanted to introduce you to the, give you a kind of a flavor of the areas which we try to address through various types of activities that we have developed at ICCROM Sharjah. Starting from professional leadership education, and we're trying to address professionals here. If you see the first quarter of this circle, then we looked into, we have activities related to knowledge dissemination in forms of publications, guidance to reach networks, and the other target groups were related to policymakers and decision makers, where we had, you know, policy studies and meetings as to how we could develop means by which we could help policymakers. But more importantly, also the communities and the community, and now we talk about people-centered approaches a lot, how we could, as ICCROM, also develop our actions related to advocacy, which is one of our mandate actually as an organization, and how we could reach out communities by various means. And there are many ways that we address that through exhibitions, the award program, but also seminars, etc. And at the heart of this, we have some selective field projects that we learn from, we inform, you know, what we do in every aspect that we do in these types of scope of work. So we look at capacity building in this broader sense. We don't look at it as merely like training. We looked at it in a very comprehensive way, addressing various audiences. So let's start with the activities of training. These are actually pictures that we had for Syrians that we trained together with UNESCO Beirut at the time. on stabilization of buildings. Of course, we could not enter Syria at the time, so the Syrian colleagues came to Beirut, and we tried to have hands-on work in areas near Beirut. We also were training people how to salvage objects and how to document and how to use the methodology that we've developed. We had several trainings in this area, starting from sub-regional training involving people from Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Sudan, Yemen, and also specific training that I mentioned also for Syria, but also for Libya. We had some training also together with our partners in Libya, Iraq, and Syria in areas related to museums, collections, and risk preparedness. In Yemen, we worked also with UNESCO Doha, and we provided some recorded lectures because accessibility was a problem. And then we had some activities also in Jordan. So within these activities, we embedded important aspects such as emergency documentation, how we document quickly and with safe conditions, and how we stabilize objects, you see here on the left, but also how we document and how we classify and register, objects that we find in the field after destruction. But one good example that I wanted to highlight here, because we call it leadership training, is that our aim is to have national leaders in each country who could disseminate this knowledge and have a kind of a cascade effect to train other people. And a good example was in Egypt. In Egypt, there was an organization that was established after this training that we did called the Egyptian Rescue Foundation. And they have been training other colleagues in Egyptian museums, but also they played a major role during the Arab Spring, especially when there was, I don't know if you remember at that time, there was actually a bombardment of the Islamic Museum in Cairo. So they really played an important role in that as well. And they continue to be actually working with us also in the training that we do. We also work with Interpol, with funding from the Swiss government, on how to train police officers. And then we have plans also how to work with the custom organization and customs people as to how, in that case, we worked on training police from different parts of the world, not only the Arab region, who came to Sharjah, and we wanted to train them as to how they can protect cultural heritage in terms of crisis and prevent illicit trafficking at the time of crisis. So people came from different parts of the world in what is called specialized police units. These are the police units that are specialized in saving cultural heritage because they are the first line of defense. Then we had other types of capacity building activities. I mentioned the master's program, which we launched 2 years ago. We have now the second intake that is ongoing, and I spoke to Alessio to see how we could explore much more collaboration in this area. This is in partnership with the University of Sharjah, again under the patronage of His Highness, the ruler of Sharjah, who has supported all our activities, in fact, since the establishment of the office. So this program addresses both the built and the movable cultural heritage, and we have 2 tracks where people can specialize within the 2 tracks, and they write theses and projects in areas that would be of benefit to their home country when they return. Other types of activities were related to conservation of archaeological sites, such as conservation of mosaics. These are images from the latest courses that we had in Lebanon, which with people coming from the region on saving mosaics on archaeological sites together with the Getty Conservation Institute. So these are other types of activities. I just wanted to give you also other dimension. On the idea of policy meetings and thematic think tanks, we have been always engaging the directors of heritage in everything we do so that they know what their people are being trained to and what they have acquired through the training processes that we had and how they could benefit from them. Many of them have become key actually players in the work in the countries concerned. These meetings took place either in Sharjah or in Rome during the General Assembly to revisit and really understand what we have done and what we should be doing in the future. In 2012, as I mentioned, we had what is called the Sharjah Initiative, and we were trying to promote this idea of preventive and action before the crisis started. And we gave some guidance at a symposium that addressed this area to decision makers. Also, we worked together with various sister organizations like UNESCO, Interpol, UNIDROIT, and the World Customs Organization on issues related to strengthening the protection of cultural heritage in the Arab region, and thinking about the legal and administrative frameworks in particular. We continue to work in this direction. The example of the Interpol course that I just mentioned forms part of that. And here we talk about three main areas: capacity building, and I mentioned the police training that we did, but also we look into international cooperation and how we could enhance the legal and institutional frameworks. This has been followed together with various colleagues working in this particular area, especially when it comes to the legal dimension and the institutional dimensions that are really in great need of development. In the area of recovery, we had the first activity at the Louvre Museum in Lens, and we looked at case studies in Europe in particular after the wars, and we looked as to how the reconstruction of cities in Europe took place, and we had different case studies, and we had preprints already there, but we are now printing again a second revised edition. So this is the first activity that we had on recovery. Then we continued that in Rome at the General Assembly, where we had a thematic discussion on post-conflict reconstruction and recovery. Again, we continued that with what also ICCROM was involved in the Rome Appeal, and on the importance of documentation of cultural heritage at risk. And that informed what was called later on the Warsaw Recommendations of Recovery and Reconstruction of Cultural Heritage, that we also lately translated into Arabic, as you see here on the right, addressing the various aspects related to recovery and the principles of looking into recovery, especially with looking into community needs, resilience, issues related to documentation, governance, education, planning, etc. We continued that, and we had in February 2019 a workshop of experts, and based on that workshop, with people coming from the field in the region, especially in areas where destruction took place, and the aim was to develop a monograph and a methodology as to how we can look into developing, steps or guidance for recovery for people who are involved in recovery, especially of historic cities. Other policy meetings included what is called the Arab Cultural Heritage Forum. This forum has a different dimension. We brought people from the culture sphere and beyond. We had people, not necessarily heritage specialists, but also people coming from the media. We had actors, we had musicians, we had, the idea is to raise the awareness also of, to really make it more known to a larger audience, how it is important to work with the different other sectors, or the larger sphere, if you want, of cultural heritage. And we had these meetings again supported by the governments of Sharjah and the UAE. And we published, in fact, the first forum. We had also the second forum virtually earlier last year, and we are now publishing it. It helps inform also policies in this direction. We hosted also other conferences, such as this conference called Protecting the Past, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with this Amina project. And we worked with Oxford University, Art Jamil, and the Global Heritage Fund to see how we could focus particularly in this conference on digital documentation and its importance to heritage management in the MENA region. So we gathered information from various actors in the field. We have also what is called the Medina program or initiative. And here we look into historic cities, not necessarily in conflict, but we look into various aspects related to what we call the integrated conservation approach, and lately, which was developed into the HUL approach, the historic urban landscapes. So we have been also working in this direction. Finally, I'd like also to talk about some of our field projects. We have some restoration projects. This is an archaeological site on your left in the UAE, and we did some restoration work, very meticulous and very precise work that we did in conservation of archaeological heritage. On the right, structural consolidation of a wind tower in Sharjah. But also we had other projects with the Oman Museum. We restored historic houses in the old city of Muscat, which lost much of its fabric. And here are some images from these royal houses where the current, in fact, His Majesty the Sultan used to live. And lately we have initiated this project with the support of the United Arab Emirates. At the time, we worked hard to on a proposal, in fact, to be involved in this project for about 2 years with the United Arab Emirates. The project that was given to UNESCO eventually to manage the project, but we are now involved in the capacity building work with colleagues involved from Rome in the project that they took over recently. So these are some of the meetings that we had, especially with the communities, the one below, and how it is important in this recovery phase to work with the communities, understanding their needs and understanding their ambitions. And another important project that is related to recovery is what is called the Western Sudan Community Museums Project. By default, these are community museums. They belong to the communities and they have ethnographic material. There are 3 museums at this axis, this corridor in Africa. And we selected 3 museums that have, historically, they have many issues in common. And the aim was to create these museums as centers for communities where they are not only museums with objects, but also places for reconciliation, for peace building of the various groups, especially in the Darfur area, where there used to be conflict. This project was funded by the British Council, and we were very grateful to receive £1.5 million to help develop this project. And we're very proud of it because really it touched on the other aspects beyond the physical aspects of conservation. So we looked into, while we looked into building conservation, as you see here in the museums, which actually are historic buildings themselves, we worked on training people how to restore such mud brick buildings. But also we looked into the collections management and safeguard in the collections inside these museums. We looked into aspects related to education and how the curators and the people responsible of these museums can really go beyond the museums and have some dialogue and interaction with the communities, and especially with the schools and the young and the youth. So this project really was something that we are proud of. Finally, on the outreach level, we had several exhibitions. Here we had pictures before and after destruction. We had the traveling exhibition that took place in Bahrain, Rome, Sharjah, and Amman, Jordan. And Rafif mentioned the award program, which is part of our outreach program. The winning project Souq al-Saqtiyya. You can see a picture here below that went to the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. And I was happy to attend the lecture by Dr. Ali Ismail with Alessio a month perhaps ago. And this is actually to encourage best and good practices in conservation. And we have also another type of awards for the youth, which is called the Youth Award. And here we try to encourage the youth to use their artistic skills who are in touch with schools to, especially through the national commissions of UNESCO, to help disseminate the knowledge and encourage people to use art in the awareness of young people to conserve their heritage, because this is the future, and this is the future generation with whom, you know, we count for future actions. This is the winner of the previous cycle, the town of Beit Sahur in Bethlehem, which was the grand winner of this was actually 2018, sorry, this is a mistake here. And you can see some pictures of the other winning projects. On the right, you see also within the art and youth award program, we have photography, we have films done by the youth. And we have several exhibitions also taking place in many places. Finally, I'd like to mention also beyond the youth and the exhibitions, also how we developed a guide for school teachers many years ago, and this is still valid and it's being used. But more importantly, we have been continuing to develop translation and the new studies and books related to cultural heritage, and especially in times of crisis. I mentioned the Warsaw recommendation, which we translated, but I would like to mention here on the right-hand side, the ICCROM project on case studies, on analysis of case studies for the recovery and reconstruction of cultural heritage that we could learn from. The book here on the left below is related to the new methodologies that we took forward from preventive conservation to risk management, especially in museums. And there is also another book for evacuation of cultural heritage that you maybe are familiar with, which was authored by colleagues in Rome. So this is the last slide I have, and this is actually from Homs from Damascus. It's a church where you have people praying without a roof. And this actually is giving hope to people to continue their action, their function, their resilience towards the safeguard of their cultural heritage, which is part of their human existence and their well-being. So with this, I end my lecture. I don't know how much I took, but thank you very much. Maybe I took more than I should.
No, thank you, Zaki. Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation, very broad. We've been able to travel with you and to understand how much ICCROM is doing in many fields. And so really thank you. I'm speaking now in my capacity of Deputy Director of the Master in Cultural Property Protection in Crisis Response. So this lecture will be made available to former participants and future participants of the Master. We are launching the new edition. And I also thank you on behalf of Edoardo Greppi. Professor Greppi is the director of the Master, is not with us today. And I really hope we will have the occasion to meet together in another moment, in another way, not just online, because the community of people involved in this important commitment of protection of cultural heritage is broad, but not so big. So we are kind of big family and we meet. Sometimes there are friends connected now. I never met you, but I'm sure we will have the occasion. And so I took the occasion to thank you now, because I'm sorry I have another meeting in 10 minutes, but I leave the floor to Alessio. If eventually there are comments or questions, we don't have that much time in general, because there are a lot of meetings going on for all of us, also for Zaki, I guess, but maybe a couple of questions. And so thank you again, and Alessio, I let you go on.
Thank you, Giovanna. Thank you very much. And I hope we meet soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. Yes, we still have around 10 minutes, so I would invite maybe some of the people attending this talk to eventually pose some question. Let me take the occasion to say thank you to ICCROM, not just to Zaki, who is a friend, but to ICCROM, because the Director General, your Director General, Webb and Doro, but also some of your colleagues like Aparna Tandon, Rohit Gyatso, Maria Teresa Iaquinta. I don't want to miss someone. They are all very committed to support our program and our master. So it's another occasion to say that is very important to us. And I was also able to recognize some common friends in your pictures, like from Monir or Francesco or Stefano. Anyway, meantime, I have one question to you, just to break the ice. And the question is this: you are also engaged as ICCROM and as ICCROM Sharjah in particular in training. Since we are developing this in the frame of our master, this is very at the core of our attention as well. We know that you are supporting, you are in partnership with the university in Sharjah of a master program focusing on taking care about cultural heritage. But my question is about the new professionals. What do you expect from your privileged point of view to be the demand for new professions in the next future in the region attached to cultural heritage? That's my question.
Well, you're talking about the profiles that are needed, perhaps in the cultural heritage field. Of course, the lecture has some limitation. In fact, we did several meetings also on this particular aspect with higher education institutions in the region, and we tried to really understand. We tried not only to understand, but also to look into the different profiles that are needed. On one hand, as I mentioned here, we have different, profiles that are missing in the region. We're not talking about profiles that exist in Italy. Italy is a different, there is the restoration field is very well established. So here we still are looking for conservators, for example, even if we are talking about also issues related to first aid and rapid protection, etc. So we try to address this, knowing that the extremes. One is the very specialized conservation field, but also the very practically needed fields or profiles on the ground, such as what we call them first aiders in the case of first aid, or people who are able to develop, recovery programs and address the issues of destruction. So these are mostly heritage managers in reality, and we look at heritage management in many ways, and this is actually embedded in the master program that we are leading with the university. We look at heritage management of the way we used to look at it before, but now with a broader aspect related to disaster risk management, for example. So conservation specialists, heritage managers with different profiles. Maybe they are for also built heritage. I mentioned two tracks, built heritage and museums. But also, I think we are looking for people who are able to look into new research and technologies, because in fact also, but that is very academic and maybe more into the science field. We want to work also in the future. Perhaps we can, in fact, there was recent discussions about developing also another postgraduate degree in the use of technology and how we could within that, of course. But these are the main areas that we thought are important for the region during the meetings that I just mentioned.
Good. Thank you for this answer. So, but this answer made me think on something else. So let me check if, of course, if anyone is willing to pose a question, you have the priority. Of course, just switch on your camera and microphone, since we still have a few minutes. But I like the picture that you used at the end of your presentation, because I knew that picture, not exactly that picture, but a similar one. And that picture made me reflect on what's heritage about. If not to what's heritage in itself, it's about the walls or the people meeting there. And also in terms of future professions, I think this is gonna count a lot, no? Because of course it's about the combination between heritage and people. And if I were to say my personal view, it's much more about people than about stones.
Right.
So yes, I feel that I don't know if you share this vision, but I feel that also capacity of creating connections and dialogue and dialogue among diversity, because we live in a global world.
Right.
This would be very relevant, aside from the technical and research and technological professions. This is my feeling from here, of course.
I totally agree. And in fact, I mean, I also mentioned that project in Sudan, which really highlighted, really the focus was community, although we did restoration and we did collections management and education. But really the focus at the end is community, because in such cases, it is the recovery of community that is, who are the owners practically of this heritage. So this is just in few words, but I can elaborate much more, of course, on that.
Yeah, it's very large. I know, and community in the end, it's us. It's all of us in the very end, of course.
Exactly. So in fact, when we decided like which are the profiles, and when we talk about heritage managers, we can talk about skills that are related to communication, not only conservation, but also how these people will manage and will interact with other actors, especially the communities.
Very good. So we're going to conclude this first talk. This talk will be made available on our channels and on the website of the Master on Cultural Property Protection in Crisis Response, and it will be very helpful. We are going to use all the input, almost, let's say, because you gave really a lot, to try to build up a future program, a next program starting in next autumn, fall, to possibly be fully attached of the field work that institutions like yours, like ICCROM, are doing. I'm very happy and very pleased to see among the participants also some of our, let's say, participants.
Friends and colleagues, yes, I see many.
And yes, and also participants to the Heritage Beyond Walls program, which is focusing on Syria, and you talked quite extensively about Syria, and also from our master in other master in World Heritage and Cultural Projects for Development. So yes, let's conclude here. We managed time very well. Thanks a lot, Zaki, to you, for your time and the work you do, which is very precious to us. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, and we will stay in touch, I hope. Thank you.
Goodbye to all.
Bye-bye.